Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers, in keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. We ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with a focus on their application in everyday life in recovery. This is the 6th session of the 6th cycle of the workshop that was presented on June 1st, 2024, where we completed the harms inventory portion of step 4. Next week, we'll begin step 5. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. The Big Book. In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And basically what this is the Big Book is actually the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the set of instructions of how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol, making our life unmanageable. We need to be aware, however, that merely reading the book without experiencing it is like reading the instructions on how to assemble a piece of furniture, but just reading the instructions doesn't give you the finished piece of furniture. You have to actually follow the instructions and do what it says to do. The same as you can't learn how to swim without jumping in the water. You can't learn how to dance without practicing and practicing and practicing. And that's what we're doing here, coming straight from the Big Book. Now, we do jump around because we're focusing on the application of the steps. So when we go into the Big Book, the first place we're going to look is on the cover page, which states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And here I don't get involved in the conversation around is it recovered or recovering. I see recovered in there. And quite frankly, I can't even recall any instances of recovering. It may be in there somewhere, but I do see recovered in there a lot. So we look at what does it mean to be recovered. And the definition is that the problem is removed.
I don't have to make a choice whether I drink alcohol or not, because I don't even think about drinking it. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. Alcohol is no longer an option to solve any of my problems. Selfishness and self centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful. And my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new peaceful ones. And then the next place we're going to look is on page 84 of the big book, where it talks about the 10th step promise. There's lots of promises in the book, not just the 9th step promise, but this is on page 84. And it states that we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We'll see that our new attitude toward liquor has that a new our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Then we're going to jump to page 27, which defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Then we're going to jump over to the appendix of the spiritual experience that says that the definition of recovered is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then the forward to the first edition states that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Then it later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as becoming willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. And that's where we start working the steps. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. So the first place we go is this is where we start looking at the steps. And step one is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And as a real alcoholic, what this does, it's the knowledge. I understand this about myself. However, as a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after the other. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which now brings us to step two. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the greatest thing about this is I get to decide what that power is. And the only requirement, again, in step two, is to answer yes to the following question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If you said yes to this question, you're done with step two, which now takes us to step three, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Remember in step 3, this is only making a decision. I don't have the power at this point or the ability to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. But I've made a decision to do it, which brings us to the 3rd step, prayer, where we offer ourselves to God and we're telling God we're offering ourselves to Him and we're allowing Him to do the work on us. So this is the beginning of the work in making that decision. And the first part of that decision is understanding what I'm working with, which is the 4th step, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And we are right now in the middle of the 4th step. There are 4 4th step inventories: the resentment inventory, the fears inventory, and then there's 2 harms inventories. One has to do with the general harms of everything that I did. And then there is the harms that is related to my sex conduct. In all of these inventories, what we're looking at is it's all about me, it's all about self. Because what we find is that in most cases, we found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So on our grudge list, we set opposite each name of our injuries as we started with our resentments. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And what we found that it was all about self. It's all about me. And the parts of self, again, are our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves, our pride, our pocketbook, our money, our finances, or anything of a material nature, our emotional security, how safe we feel in the world, our ambitions, our plans for the future, both immediate and down the road, and our personal relations, how we interact with others, as well as our sex relationships. And what we look at is, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? And even though it wasn't our fault, we disregard the other person. We look at ourselves. Where were we to blame? We admitted our wrongs and we set these matters straight. And this comes straight from page 67. And it boils down to 5 main character defects. I'm selfish. I want to keep what I have and I want things done my way. I'm dishonest. I'm a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I'm self-seeking. I want more than I have right now. And I'm frightened and I'm inconsiderate. And then of these 5 main character defects, we added some additional character defects, which delves into some of these a little bit more. Now, we went through and we've already done the resentment inventory. But when we're looking at these inventory forms, which the inventory forms are in the back of the workbook, there's blank ones in the back, and then there's some sample ones in the book itself. We're going to be starting today in the workbook on page 134, but we're not quite there yet. So when we're looking at our character defects, we're looking, there's this little grid on all of the inventory forms. And this little grid, we just check off. Was it I was selfish, I was dishonest, I was self-seeking, I was frightened, I was inconsiderate, or other? And you want to look at that list of other character defects to see if there's other character defects that were involved. And if you found some other ones, you add it, you write them in on the other column. Now, and I review this because it's important. The big book lists things like mean and egotistical, indignant, self-pitying, self-centered, self-delusional. And once we get to steps 6 and 7, The instructions includes that we have to be ready to let God remove from us all of the things that we admitted are objectionable and every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So while every character defect falls within the major five or a combination of them, it's actually better to be more specific. So, for example, people pleasing is really being dishonest, self seeking, and frightened all at the same time. But people pleasing gives a more accurate description of what I'm actually doing. So, when we get to this, remember, we repeat what we don't repair. And if you've ever found yourself, like I have, having the same situations come up over and over and over again, and you're one of those people, why does this always happen to me? We continue to be unhappy because our character defects continue to come into play. And we wonder why? But it's not the person that's listed in column 1 of the resentment inventory, but it's the character defects. So we continue to look at these character defects as we got into the fears inventory. And last week we covered the fears inventory. But just to recap and review, we're only born with 2 fears, which is the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. All others are based on we're either afraid we're not going to get something we think we deserve, or we're afraid we're going to lose something that we have. So last week we went through the fears inventories and we started on the harms inventories, but I'm going to review the harms inventories again this week. And this is where we're picking up from last time. The harms inventories. There's 2 harms inventories. Basically, it's the same process, but we're reviewing our harms to other people, excluding our sexual behavior. And then we have a separate inventory that is the review of our own sex conduct. So we review our conduct over years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? And then for the harms inventory using sex, it's the same thing, but you add, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And this is on page 69 of the big book. So this is an example of harms to others excluding sex. And this would have to do with whether it's a person or an institution or a policy. And the example that I used here was an institution, which was a department store. And the person bought a stolen skirt and sweater from a shoplifter. So the character, the parts of self that got satisfaction from this. And just as a little preview, this part, column 3, remember in the resentment inventory, the parts of self were wounded. In the harms inventory, the parts of self got satisfaction from. So what part of self got satisfaction from this? And I put down the pocketbook because the person didn't have to pay the full retail price. They got a quality product for a cheaper price. And it also gave satisfaction to their ambitions because they had nice things. Now, in columns 4 and 5 of the harms inventory, it's a little bit different. What we're looking at, there's 2 parts to it. Part A is what should I have done differently? Part B is what will I do in the future? So what this person should have done differently was not buy stolen merchandise. And what they'll do in the future is pay for the things they want and not take what doesn't belong to them. Then in column 5, we look at the character defects that allowed them to do those things. And therefore, they were self-seeking, they were dishonest, and they were a thief. So the key thing remember, in the harms inventory is to see the new behaviors that I need to be incorporating into my everyday life, which is what we list in column 4. So when we look at the harms to others, excluding sex, we go through and we list every one that we've hurt: people, businesses, again, policies, laws, anything that we may have hurt or cheated. Column 2 is all about you. It doesn't matter what the other person did, because this is only about the actions that you took to hurt someone else, and make sure that it's an action statement about you. It's something I said, it's something I caused to happen. It doesn't matter if the other person knows you harm them or not, as long as you know it goes on your inventory. When we get to step 9, that's where we deal with that. But at this point, we're not there yet. We harm that person, place, or thing. We put it on our inventory. Now, remember, in column 3, it's the opposite of the resentment. It's about the parts of self that got rewarded as a result of harming that person. So I check off the appropriate part of self that got satisfaction from doing the action that I did in column 2. And uh, again, we looked at the examples, and this is the same, the self-esteem. So now this is the harms that had the harms that had nothing to do with our sex behavior. Next, we're going to look at the harms including sex. So this would be an example of it. This person said that they harmed their coworker because they dressed seductively and teased them so that he would take them out and buy them drinks. And what this did was it caused frustration, as well as lying and dishonesty, because they were both married. So what this, the parts of self that got satisfaction were their pocketbook, because they didn't have to buy themselves those things, and ambitions, because it was feeding their ego. Now, what should they have done was they should act professionally and dress professionally at work, and they should pay their own way and not take advantage of people. And the character defects that allowed that to happen were that they were selfish, they were a user, they were inconsiderate, or they were lustful. So the way we do this is we go back to that inventory form, and we list all of the people that we've hurt through sex or intimate relations. And this, one of the rationalizations that I've heard come up is that, well, I didn't actually go through and have relations with this person, but it harmed them, and it also might have harmed other people that you were in a relationship with, because now I've heard it referred to as it's an emotional affair. It's like an obsession. It takes, you're not being honest with the person that you're actually with. So you would list everyone you hurt through sex or intimate relations in column 1. And this would be people you hurt by doing things such as, for example, if you got pregnant, so someone would have to marry you, or saying to your girlfriend, well, if you loved me, you would. Or if you dated someone for no other reason than financial gain, if you cheated on your spouse, or if you dated a married man or a woman, or that kind of thing. And then in column 2, you list exactly what you did to the person listed in column 1. Try to keep it as simple as possible. Column 2 is all about you, and it doesn't matter what the other person did. to cause this, if at all. It's only about the actions that you took to harm someone else. So it doesn't matter whether they know you harmed them or not. So, for example, if a person was having an affair with a married man, if a woman was having an affair with a married man, his wife's name would be in column one as the person hurt because you had an affair with her husband would be in column two. And then you ask yourself if these actions created jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. And then that brings us back to um, columns 3, 4, and 5. And let me see where we are in the workbook. Okay, so once we're looking at these parts of self, these are the parts of self that get satisfaction. In other words, I told them off, as opposed, yeah, it's one thing to let someone know how you feel, but it's another thing to hurt someone when you're doing it. And that's the difference where, we're looking here at the parts of self that got rewarded. So in this case, we checked off the pocketbook and we checked off the ambitions because the ego was getting fed. And then when we look at column 4, we look at what we should have done and what we're going to do in the future. And then we listed the character defects. I was selfish, I was a user, I was inconsiderate, and I was lustful. Now, always keep in mind that we are not bad people trying to get good, but sick people who are trying to get well. And we may have done some pretty awful things. Sometimes when I think back to some of the things that I did when I was drinking, I still get like a sick feeling in my stomach, like, but I know that those things that I did don't define who I really was. And we've done nothing to be punished for. So when we get to steps 8 and 9, we take the actions to correct those harms. And then there's the funny story that I think I told it last week, but I'll tell it again this week, about the suggestion not to start dating while you're learning the steps or to wait at least a year. Now, the way it was told to me was to make no major decisions in the first year. So that's how stuff kind of gets watered down and evolves in AA. But the way they tell the story, they say the suggestion was to not start dating while you're learning the steps and to wait at least a year, or until you're well into step 10 before getting into new relationships. So there was a woman who was working her steps and she followed the advice. And when she was ready to date, she asked her sponsor what she should do. And her sponsor told her that the answer to every question is in the big book and to go to page 69 for advice on sex. But she was a little dyslexic and confused, and she went to page 96 instead. And this is what she read. Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You're sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. Okay. Instead, if she had gone to page 69, she would have found the directions on how to figure out who she should be in a relationship, all of her relationships, which states that in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideal and to help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. So the thing about this is that when you're working the steps, you end up with the same personality no matter who you're with. You're still going to be who you are. you'll probably be more of who you are because a lot of the character defects that caused you to do other things are being removed. So once those character defects are removed, you no longer have the negative consequences brought into existence by the behaviors you had when you were at step one. Nor, and this is an important piece that I keep coming back to many times, nor do you have inappropriate reactions to what's going on around you. And as a result of this, all of your relationships change. Remember when we were talking about the disease concept, we talked about how our brains are different. And there's a malfunction of that fight or flight response, which causes us to have inappropriate reactions to things going on around us. So when we move on, we're starting to look at what is our ideal self going to be? And this is still on page 69. And it states that whatever our ideal self turns out to be, we must be willing to grow towards it. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The answer will come if we want it. And now we're going into the part which, and I know I went over this last week, but I'm going to go over it again because I know we have some newcomers here. The ideal self worksheet, which is on pages 140 and 141 or around that area, which you might want to make copies of this or copy it onto another sheet because you want to have one of these for each person you have a relationship with. But in the ideal self worksheet, you're going to examine each one of your relationships and you're asking yourself the question, how have I been selfish? How have I been dishonest? How have I been inconsiderate? How have I hurt them or anyone around them? How have I aroused jealousy? How have I aroused suspicion? How have I aroused bitterness? What do I need to do differently? What characteristics do I want to have that would make me, not them, the ideal person in this relationship? What character assets would enable me to do things differently? And if I had these characteristics, how would I act when I'm with this person? And then it has the little arrows pointing up, which is telling you this is the ideal that you want to work towards. This is how you should act in all your relationships. So that's getting us ready to move into step 5 as we start looking at our relationships. And we have, after this, on the next page, there is the pre-step 5 item, because we're preparing ourselves to sit down with another person for the 5th step. So to prepare for the 5th step, this is where we reverse the resentments. So what do? I'm reversing the resentment. So everything we need for steps 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 is in the inventories. So we start with the resentment inventory. So first, we read the resentment forward. So in this instance, I'm using Mr. Brown directly from the book. Remember, I embellished upon some of this stuff. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown because of his attention to my wife. It affects my sex relations. Part 4 is what I did. I was drunk and I didn't come home from work and I stayed out all night. And the character defects that allowed me to do that was I was selfish. I was frightened, I was inconsiderate, and I was jealous. Um, and those are the things that I did to get get that ball rolling. So here it is. Basically, what it says is that I am mad at Mr. Brown because he pays a lot of attention to my wife. This affected my sex relationship, and I got the ball rolling by getting drunk after work and staying out all night. And again, I added that artistic license. The character defects that allowed me to get drunk after work and stay out all night were being selfish, frightened, inconsiderate, and jealous. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to read this resentment backwards. So I've reversed the form. I put column 5 first. All right. So we're looking at I was selfish, I was frightened, I was inconsiderate, I was jealous. My part was I was drunk and I didn't come home from work. I stayed out all night and it affected my sex relations because Brown paid attention to my wife. So now the way this works is we read it backwards. If I was not selfish, frightened, inconsiderate, and jealous, I would have come straight home from work, not gotten drunk and stayed out all night. Then my sex relations would not have been affected because Mr. Brown would not be paying attention to my wife. That's how we read the resentment backward. Now, the next page, at the bottom of page 43, you have a little worksheet in order to do this. If I was not, fill in the blank, whatever you had in column 5, I would not have, fill in the blank, whatever was in column 4. Then these things, the things that were in column 3, would not have been affected because whatever was in column 1 would not have done what they did in column 2, or it wouldn't have mattered that whatever was written in column 1 and column 2. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at just the facts. No blame, no shame or guilt is associated with these. Nothing's good, bad, right, or wrong. Everything is just a fact. You take responsibility for getting the ball rolling for each resentment and realize that it's your character defects that allowed you to do what you did in column 4. And the next steps 5 through 9, will correct these things. So and again, if when you're reversing the resentment, something doesn't make sense or ring true, either column 2 or column 4 is inaccurate, and you may have to tweak that a little bit. But note that when the rest of the steps are done, any remaining resentment may go away in a very short period of time. As we said, when we're looking at those facts, we're looking at just remembering that when the rest of we're still in the very beginning stages of working on the steps. So note that when the rest of the steps are done, any remaining resentment may go away in a short period of time. When I look back and I think about some of the resentments that I had, now it's not there anymore. Remember, resentment means to re-feel the negative feelings. And I can think about it, but the feeling is not there anymore. So if after reversing the resentment, you're still upset with the person, you want to put an X next to their name. All of these that you're upset about the person. And then the names that have an X next to them, you add them to your morning prayers. And what you would say is, please, God, give so-and-so a great job, health, a loving relationship, a loving family. You're asking God for anything that you might want for yourself, for that person. And you'll do an individual prayer for each person that has an X next to their name. That's the activity. Whenever anybody says, well, I've got this resentment, it's like, okay, this is what you do. This is the cure for resentment. And you keep on saying that prayer until it goes away. You keep on saying it until that resentment goes away. Because it's important to note here that God will only do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Column 4 of the fear inventory and the harms inventories lists the things that we're capable of doing. So when we go back, for example, here to our fear inventory, what we look at is column 4 and 5. Column 4 is your action plan of what you're going to start doing immediately and to continue doing so that your fears don't come true. That's what you want to do in your fear inventory. And then with your harms inventory, it's the same thing. Um, on the harms inventory, we're looking at what I should have done differently and what I'm going to do in the future. So this is showing me how I'm going to treat people moving forward. And again, this finishes up the 4th step and is bringing us to the 5th step, which I'm going to just do as an intro, and then I'll open it up in the last 15 minutes or so. We'll have some discussion. But remember that step 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And it's done in different ways depending on the sponsor. And it's a good thing, however, to make sure to work on any resentments that didn't ring true or make sense when they were reversed. Spend as much time as needed on your inventories before starting step 5 so that when it is started, it's something that is just facing facts. And I know sometimes I'll break up the 5th step. Like we'll do a 5th step on just the resentments, and then we'll do another 5th step, and then we'll meet again. We'll do a 5th step on just the fears or just the harms, or sometimes we'll do it all at once. It really depends on the person. I've done it both ways, where we had everything all together. We went over them all 4 inventories all at once, or the person wanted to go through it one at a time and do them one at a time. Either or is fine. It's just a matter of sitting down. But when we get to page 75 in the big book, it states, when we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. And to clarify here, this does not mean that I'm telling the story of my life. I was born on this day, and then tell everything from the point of when you were born from that point forward. It means that this is my truth. And my story is that my life sucked because I was mean-spirited, dishonest, jealous, judgmental, and lazy. Basically, step 5 is not about talking about your feelings, nor is it a psychiatry session. It doesn't include a list of your good qualities. It's looking at the things that are blocking you off from your higher power. And these things are your character defects. So next week we'll delve into it a little bit deeper, because basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to sit down with your sponsor and you're going to go over your character defects. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at how our character defects affected our life up to that point.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's Prayer for Mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.